Hey guys, so I just spent some time with the latest speakers from Polk Audio, and I have to say, they are awesome. So come on, let's go ahead and check them out. Alright, so here it is, a new tower speaker from Polk Audio. This one's called the R500 and it's a part of the Reserve series. Now the first thing that I want to comment on is the overall look of this speaker because guys, I'm not sure how you feel, but I love the way the R500 looks. It has this sleek design with a balanced aesthetic symmetry that quite frankly, I haven't seen from any other Polk Audio product. And another thing I like is that when you look closely, you'll notice that it has this nice texture to the finish. It helps to keep things interesting and classy without being too ostentatious. And when you couple that to the look of the black drivers with the black kind of dark gray finish, it just looks so good. So what we're going to do now is move on to a few details, starting with the price. So these speakers retail for $599 a piece, putting them at $1,200 US a pair. We are going to round up a little. And next, let's talk about the design. So the R500 is a 2.5-way speaker, and some of you will notice that, hey, those look like the drivers from the Legend line. And that's because they are. It's basically a copy and paste job. And that's because what the Reserve series represents is more of a higher value proposition, which means you're going to get 2 of their 5.25-inch woofers. They call this the turbine technology. Basically, these ridges are there to help break up standing waves and to help give the cone material some better structural rigidity. Up top, we have the 1-inch ring radiating tweeter, and that is going to be it for the front. So what we're going to do now is turn these speakers around and then take a look at the back. Okay, so here's the rear of the R500, and it's pretty uneventful until we get to the bottom down here. So a lot of you may be wondering, what the heck is this device right here? And essentially, it's a port, or what Polk Audio calls the X port. And I'll spare you all the marketing brochure material just by saying, look, it's designed to give you low noise. Now to me, it just looks like a turbine waiting for a bird strike. Beneath that, we have a set of 5-way binding posts, and then we have some feet that attach to the speaker. And I have to say, it does a great job of maintaining stability on something that's so tall and slim. So if you're in a household with pets or kids, you should be able to get away with owning these speakers without them tipping and collapsing on top of them, unless of course that's what you want. So with that out of the way, now it's time to talk about how these guys sound. So look, as I said at the beginning of this video, I think these speakers are awesome. Still, they have a very distinct sound, so in order to help you quickly understand whether or not they would make you happy, what I'm going to do to kick off this evaluation is first give you a general overview as to what you're getting with the R500. And then afterwards, well, that's when I'll go into the usual audiophile detailed summary. So, in a nutshell, what you're getting out of the R500 is a slim tower speaker that's all about giving you a big, warm, and muscular sounding presentation. So if you're somebody who values a big soundstage, you like treble that's a little elevated but otherwise easy to listen to, mid-range that is full-bodied and warm sounding, with bass that's strong, prominent, if not a little bit thick sounding, then odds are you're going to love the sound of the R500s. And the great news is they're very easy speakers to work with, something I'll get to later on in this video. However, they're clearly not going to be for everybody, especially people who are looking for either an accurate presentation, people who are very particular about bass speed and precision, or people who like a lot of treble or treble that has a very prominent and sharp sound. If that's what you're going for, there will be other options out there for this kind of money that you will be happier with. However, if you're like me, you like a slim speaker that sounds bigger than what it is, you like a warm presentation with just a little bit of liveliness, with something that quite frankly sounds good with just about any genre of music, then odds are, like I said, these are speakers you will want to check out. And that leads me to the individual details about its performance. Okay, so let's talk about the treble first. Now, as I mentioned before, the treble response on the R500 is going to be a little elevated, yet at the same time, very easy to listen to. And I think what's going on here is that Polk Audio likely bumped up the treble at the crossover point and then smoothened out the rest of the response. Now, this has become a common voicing strategy within the hi-fi industry, and for a good reason. It's what we tend to like, because bear in mind, there is a lot of information in this critical frequency range. So when you bump it up just a little bit, it, what that means to the listener is that it makes it very easy to discern fine detail, while all the while giving you this lively, interesting, and airy presentation that so many audiophiles enjoy. Now, if you use a high-quality driver, what that means is you get this detail without it going too far in the wrong direction of sounding bright or harsh or just fatiguing over time. Now, with the Polk R500s, I noticed that there is going to be a roll-off at the top end to where it makes it approachable to listen to less than perfect sounding recordings. Now, if I had to be honest with you, yeah, I've heard more refined and more resolute sounding speakers at this price point. A good example would be Polk Audio's own Legend series that uses the same exact high frequency driver. Yes, it is more resolute sounding, but the compromise there is that it is not as forgiving of less than perfect recorded material. And given the price point of the Reserve series and the audience that they're targeting here, I think they made the right choice with the Reserve's voicing. In fact, it's a voicing that I personally prefer because I'm not sure about you guys, but I'm sick and tired of hi-fi that determines the kind of music that I can listen to and enjoy. So I'm a big fan of what they're doing here. Moving on, let's talk about the mid-range. So the mid-range, as mentioned before, takes on this warm, full-bodied sound. There's real scale and density to it. When you listen to a piano, it has some real weight and scale to the sound. Male vocals, yes, there's going to be a little bit extra there. The scale is going to be a little bit exaggerated, but otherwise, still sounds very good. Female vocals sound directly in proportion to what you would expect. And best of all, though, it has some real drive to the sound, and I think this is what makes the Reserve series, or at least the R500s, so special. Sure, there's plenty of slim tower speakers that deliver a lot of bass or a lot of treble information, but it's rare to come across a slim speaker that truly has a confident sounding mid-range, something that actually sounds good with genres like classic rock or just any rock, to where you really do need that meaty, muscular sounding mid-range. Now, no, these speakers aren't going to replace something that uses, say, a big 10-inch driver, but they sound perfectly natural with that kind of music. That's something I can't say for a lot of slim speakers. And then next, let's move on and talk about the bass. So yes, the bass is going to be strong, prominent, and thick. And in some rooms and to some people's taste, is going to be too much of a good thing. But here's the thing about the bass. It really depends on the kind of room that you're in and the kind of equipment that you use. Now, it's always going to have this warm and strong character to it, but it can actually sound very tight and controlled if you use the right equipment, which I'll talk about later on in this video. Now, it's important to note that the bass from about 100 Hertz on up is incredibly strong. It'll sound like a much bigger speaker in that regard. Now, it's also going to be reasonably strong down to around 60 Hertz, but that's where it starts to drop off. So if you're a bass head and you like a lot of deep bass, you are still going to need some subwoofers with these speakers, at least in my opinion. Moving on, let's talk about the imaging. This is going to be another strong suit, and I don't mind saying, this may be the best imaging Polk Audio speaker that I've come across. It takes next to no effort to get a good locked-in center image between the speakers, and it doesn't take any effort to get a nice wide soundstage. And best of all, the off-axis response is great. You can stand up and walk around a room and still get a uniform presentation. Now, yes, I noticed that when you move off to the side, the tweeter does draw a little bit more attention to itself than it does when you're sitting right in between the speakers, but otherwise it's not a big deal. And quite frankly, I think they're a better option than, say, clips for home theater, especially if you like to entertain people and you have a lot of people sitting off to the side of the main system. Moving on, let's talk about dynamic output. So dynamic output's going to be okay. It's not going to be incredible. It's not going to sound dynamically constipated, for a lack of a better expression, but it's not going to sound as agile as other speakers that prioritize speed and precision. So lastly, you know what? Let me just go subjective here. What I like so much about these speakers, beyond the individual traits, and beyond just that muscular sound, is the fact that they just sound so good with every genre of music. While reviewing these speakers, I was reaching for recordings that I don't even reach for when I'm listening to $13,000 speakers, just because they bring the fun into the equation, and they're a product that I just don't have to make excuses for. So to really hammer this home, let's talk about how the R500s compare to some other speakers in the same general price range. So let's get to it. let's get to some individual comparisons. And to be clear, I'm going to have to keep this very short and sweet because I have so much ground to cover. So let's start off with the ELIC Debut Reference Series because I could see many people cross-shopping the two. Overall, the ELIC Debut Reference Series is going to have some advantages. It features better integration between the treble, the mid-range, and the bass. It's the more balanced sounding speaker, and overall, it has the least offensive sound. So if that's what you want, a really balanced speaker with just a little bit of warmth and otherwise very unoffensive, the ELIC Debut Reference Series will likely still be your choice. However, if you feel like that sound is a little too laid back and boring for your taste and you want some pizzazz, then go with the Reserve Series. It's going to have more emphasis in the treble, while at the same time actually sounding smoother. The mid-range is going to take on a richer sound, the bass is going to be stronger, and the imaging is going to be better on the Reserve Series. Next, let's talk about how they compare to the Wharfedale Evo lineup, because I haven't heard any other Wharfedale products, don't ask. So when it comes to the Evo line, well, this is where things get interesting, because even though the Evo line has that warm sound, they use completely different drivers. They use a dome mid-range and an AMT high-frequency driver. This gives them the edge in terms of resolution, refinement, and the ability to show you what the recording really sounds like. They do a great job at that. However, Wharfedales also have some problems. Their dispersion's a little bit limited, meaning that the Reserve Series is definitely going to image better, and plus they're more particular about the kind of music they're going to sound good with, and they're also particular about the kind of equipment that they tend to work best with. The Reserve Series is much easier to work with, and by comparison, even though it doesn't have the same amount of resolution, the mid-range sounds fuller in scale and the bass is definitely stronger for the money. So moving on, let's talk about Klipsch, since this is another major competitor. Klipsch, as you can imagine, they're still the kings of giving you that lively, you are there listening experience. They project in a forward way. The treble is going to be brighter, the sound is going to be more dynamic and in your face. However, the Reserve Series is going to be smoother by direct comparison, a lot more forgiving of poorly recorded material. The mid-range sounds warmer, richer, the bass is going to sound stronger, and the imaging on the Reserve Series is going to be superior. And plus, the Reserve Series is a little bit easier to work with. Next, let's move on and talk about the big one, the Triangle Berea series. So as you guys know, I love the Berea series. I still love the Berea series to this day, even in spite of the Reserve Series now. But they are very different. So the Berea line has more of an open sound to it thanks to the prominence within the mid-range. It projects in more of a forward way than the Reserve Series. The Triangle Series is going to give you more of a brighter presentation to it, whereas the Reserve is going to be a little smoother by direct comparison. The mid-range is going to sound fuller, a little bit warmer, although not as in your face, and the bass, as you can imagine, is going to be stronger. So as always, it's just a matter of what it is that you prefer. I do think the Reserve Series has better driver integration, but the Triangle Berea line can be easily driven by low power amplifiers. So again, it's just a matter of what you want. And I think we've pretty much covered all the bases now. The only thing I need to comment on are the other Polk speakers. So these definitely sound different from the signature line that exists right now. The signature line is brighter. The treble is more emphasized. The mid-range is pushed forward a little bit more. Whereas the Reserve Series, I think, is pretty much better in every other way. It's smoother sounding. It's more resolute sounding. Better driver integration. That fuller bodied sounding mid-range. Stronger sounding bass. Better imaging. It's just a better line. And compared to Legend, I just think the new Reserve Series is a much better value. Don't get me wrong, the Legend is more resolute, it's more capable of digging deeper into the recording, but that's about where the advantages end because the Reserve Series has better driver integration. It sounds more like a Polk speaker, and it has that just overall stronger sounding presentation. Plus, it's a lot easier to work with. So overall, I think the Reserve Series is a home run. So now that I'm done with comparisons, let's go over what should be a much quicker section, which is to discuss what you can do to really get great sound out of these speakers. Because the good news is, there's not much you have to do. So let's get to that. Okay, so even though it's very easy to get consistent performance out of the R500s, there are nonetheless at least a few things you need to bear in mind. So number one, let's talk about basic positioning tips. As with any speaker that outputs a lot of bass, you want to give the R500s at least a little bit of room to breathe. My suggestion would be 1.5 feet from any wall boundary. As long as you can give it that, you should be good to go. Now, if you do find yourself in a position to where you're just getting too much bass output, you can do a couple things that don't involve replacing your electronic components. The first would be common sense, quite frankly. If you have tone controls on your gear, use them and see how that works for you. And if that doesn't work, consider placing the speakers on a solid foundation like an 1.5 inch thick cutting board. I do this all the time. I did it with these speakers, and guess what? It attenuates the bass and tightens it right up. And it only costs about $15 to $20 per cutting board. And then next, let's move on and talk about equipment matching. So the big thing I want you guys to know here is that they do like power. So I don't think they'd be the best match for tube amplifiers unless you're in a small room and you listen at low volumes. For most people, I think what you're going to want is an amplifier that'll output anywhere between 50 to 100 watts per channel, depending on your room size and depending on how loud you listen. But the good news here is that you don't really have to agonize over what brand to pair up to these speakers, because they're going to sound good with just about everything. Doesn't matter if it's Denon, Yamaha, Marantz, NAD, IOTAVX. In fact, I listened to them on a $250 Sony AVR, thought they sounded great. What I described in this video translated over to that pairing. The IOTAVX SA3, very balanced, very easy to listen to, very fun. The big thing, though, I want you to know is that these speakers scale incredibly well and do benefit greatly from better components. In fact, this is something that may go miss with a lot of people due to their price point. Now, let me give you some examples. When I went from the IOTAVX SA3 to the Musical Fidelity M2SI, which is $1,000, there was a big jump in performance because the Musical Fidelity just so happens to have a sound that perfectly complements the speaker. The treble is more emphasized but more refined than the IOTAVX, and the bass is more controlled. So this gave the R500s a more high-end sounding presentation without sacrificing its overall character. And then when I decided to move all the way up to something like the Yamaha AS1200, it got even better. Now it sounds like a proper high-end speaker. Refinement, yet still easy to listen to. The bass is much more controlled, yet still has that strong sound to it. The mid-range sounds cleaner, yet still has that rich presentation. So don't be afraid to pair these speakers up to some really nice components, because believe you me, they can scale very, very well. Anyways, that is going to be it for this evaluation. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. Okay, so now that I'm essentially done with this review, I'm going to wrap up this video by laying down my own subjective and personal reactions to the R500. Because here's the deal. I love this speaker, and I don't mind saying it has become my favorite solution in this general price range. And I don't say that lightly because there are so many great options to choose from. But what it boils down to is that I love the look, I love the sound, and I'm at this point in my audio journey to where I'm tired of products that I have to make excuses for. I want something that has the kind of look and sound that I enjoy, that allows me to listen to whatever it is I want to listen to. And I'm tired of constantly fretting over, okay, well, what components are going to sound good with it? You know, is this going to pair better or is that going to pair better? I don't really have to worry about it. The only thing I have to be conscious of is, do I want to spend more money on the electronics to give it more of a refined presentation, or do I prefer more of that less refined but more kind of gritty sound on the more affordable components? That's the only thing I need to really juggle here. Otherwise, these speakers are going to become my go-to recommendation for anybody who's looking for a solution in this range who I think would like this type of a sound. Now, as always, it's not going to appeal to everybody. That's the case with everything. But it is very good. Now, I realize a lot of people watching this video right now may be asking, well, what about the Berea series? Is that done with? Is your love affair over? No, let me make it clear. Back when I first experienced those speakers in 2019, I became excited. Because you have to bear in mind, while there are many great options out there to choose from, typically products are in a very distinct category, right? You have the ELAC on offensive sound, and then you have the Klipsch just on the opposite end. It's brighter, more in your face. And the Berea line really kind of bridged that gap. And it had the kind of performance that I think most people who are stepping into their first set of real speakers would really enjoy, because it's kind of in the middle between both of those extremes. And I still stand by that to this day, and I'll still recommend them to this day. But the Polk Audio Reserve series, I personally like it better because the Berea line, Dirty Secret, was never my type of sound. I admired it for what it was, and it got me excited, and I did enjoy it. I still enjoy it. I still have a set in my house. But these, the Reserve series, that's a pair of affordable speakers I could actually live with and be happy, because I prefer its type of sound. I prefer that warmer, richer sounding mid-range. I prefer bass that's strong. I prefer treble that's a little bit lively, but otherwise easy to listen to with really good driver integration and really good imaging. And best of all, something that's not too picky when it comes to the kind of components it sounds good with. That's my kind of speaker. Not everybody's kind of speaker, but it's my kind of speaker. And I'm so happy to see Polk Audio release a genuinely good value again. It's been a while. Look, I like Polk Audio, but it seems like they kind of fell off. And let's not get started on the Legend series. I see the Legend series as more like the Star Wars sequel, something I just pretend doesn't exist, right? But I think they knocked it out the park with this one. It sounds like a Polk speaker, but a little bit more grown up. And I think that's what they needed. Anyway, that is going to be my take on the R500s. As always, guys, I appreciate you watching. If you check them out, I hope you love them as much as I do. But until next time, enjoy the music and peace.